Welcome back to Gold Derby. I'm Christopher Rosen. I'm so pleased to be joined by Larkin Seiple, the Emmy Award-nominated cinematographer whose new project is the Netflix series Beef. Larkin, I love this show, and I guess first off, what was it about Beef that you kind of really interested you and made you want to kind of go on this journey?
I think what I liked about Beef is when I first read it, I was rooting for the main characters, and then the deeper you get into the season, you kind of realize that they're villains, and I like the take on a show that has the protagonists as bad people, but you don't realize it, and so you're kind of slowly swept away with them, and you're kind of stuck in this terrible place of rooting for them but hating them at the same time, and you're kind of torn. I just liked where it went. I also just love, some of the big choices I never saw coming, like Danny singing Incubus at the end of episode 3. And the use of music is really fun. And Sunny and Jake and Hikari, all the directors, all had a really fun take on it and wanted to kind of create this very personal, almost manipulative style of filmmaking so that you're kind of bound to the characters. And I just kind of dove in.
So I love that. And how did so then visually, I guess, how did that kind of seducing, I guess, the audience, right, into maybe liking these, like you said, you're rooting for them, right? But I guess so visually, how did you approach, the first time we see Danny, the first time we see I'd love let's just start there. The first time we see Danny, how'd you approach how you wanted to kind of capture that and bring us into his world?
Well, in order to kind of make the storytelling manipulative, we opted to keep the perspectives very, very much stuck with the main characters and not really see them from an outside viewpoint, or to create another sense of basically another POV. So you understand what they're witnessing and you're with them. So the camera is generally very close to them, and we never really see outside of their POV. So if you see a shot of Danny or Amy, you're always, they're in the foreground and clean, and then generally the people they're talking to are dirty or further away. It's small things like that. But it also it was also trying to back off from that kind of storyteller POV of oh, here's the big wide shot of the room, and here's, all these cool shots that you see in a lot of flashier television. We kind of opted to keep it more reduced, kind of in a way of basically not giving the audience all of these juicy tidbits and really forcing them to stick with the characters. And from the opening scene, you can see we're very much of Steven. It's just a close-up on his face as he's kind of going through this kind of trauma of waiting in line to return something at a Home Depot type store. And that's the only scene that we really kind of used. We used a large format camera for this, the Alexa LF. That's the only scene we actually used the full sensor to kind of get this very shallow depth of field. That definitely is on par with medium format. It's incredibly shallow to a point that you kind of notice it. It stands out. And then we never do it again in the rest of the show. It's just for that opening sequence where you feel him kind of floating in this space and you're just hearing everything around him. So you're kind of bound to him and you're kind of relating to him and you want to see what he's seeing. And then the rest of the show, we shot with a cropped sensor, meaning we punched in so that we had a smaller size sensor, which gave us a little bit more depth of field, but we didn't want it to feel like a large format show. We wanted it to be a little bit more relatable, something closer to the look of Super 35. So not everything is super shallow and subjective. We wanted to see their world because, the design of it and the costumes by Grace and Helen is just so much a part of the storytelling element, like Amy's house and Danny's house and how different they are. And then obviously the clothes they wear kind of gives the audience a lot of pointers and clues. And we wanted to embrace that. We didn't want to hide from it. So that was one of the bigger choices we made as well.
Yeah, I love that. I imagine, does it take a lot of discipline to be I guess to just follow that down? Like you said, there are probably versions of the show that are maybe flashier, if that's not even the right word, you know what I mean? Or kind of doing a lot more, but staying on the characters obviously is such it like you said, it really does make the show, I think. And especially because you have these two great performances. I mean, does it take a lot of discipline, I guess, to do a show like this compared to maybe other stuff?
No, what it means is to be that reductive. It means you have to have great performances, and so very early on we're oh, this concept's gonna work. The actors can, they're great, and it's fun to stay on their face and see how they react. But also means that you're working a bit more of blocking as opposed to just like spray it down and get 5 cameras. You need to make sure that the camera can stick with the actors. And so you spend more time figuring out where they're going to go in the room. And if you have to do that on Steadicam or on a dolly. In general, we weren't really trying to do a lot of coverage either. So once we found a good size for the actor, we kind of fought to find a way not to cut. And so usually that meant kind of crafting a move or working with blocking, even just the actor walking around the camera and finding different angles was a really fun tool that we used throughout the show. But in general, we kind of, yeah, I mean, it was fun to make big choices and see if we can pull them off.
Yeah.
A lot of the shows end with oneers as well, which was a fun kind of bit way. We wanted the style to kind of stand out. We just didn't want it to feel like another drama you'd see on television.
No, it feels like completely unique. I feel watching it, almost to the point where I'm like, how do you describe like it's so cool. It's like, for lack of a better, it's like so cool, right? The show is just really cool and the visuals are so cool. Do you have a favorite oneer from the show that you were like, oh, this one was really good?
There's like a oneer, I believe, in episode 2 where Danny pulls up to the house after his car has been painted, and this is Jake Schreier's idea, and he pulls up, and the front of his car says, "I can't drive," and that's all you've known from the previous scene. And then as he gets out of the car, the camera wraps, and on the side of the truck it says, "I'm poor," and you're like, "Oh shit!" She wrote more on his truck, and then as it wraps around to the back of it, it says, "I'm a bitch." And then you see him just standing in front of Amy's house holding a hammer. And then the episode cuts. And I was like, that's just wonderful, clean storytelling. You understand of like, oh, it's just one word. And you're like, oh no, this is worse. And you're like, oh, it's much worse. And then he's like at her house, like potentially going to break and enter into her family's home. It was just a great little way to end it. And that scene also starts on a kind of an empty street, and you just see Danny's headlights in the beginning. And then Cornflake Girls playing. It's just this really nice, lovely scene. And I was just excited to do something that simple. It still took us a while because you have to get the rhythm of the machines in line to kind of pull off that shot. But yeah, it was just kind of nice to be able to do something in one take and get all those different beats.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great shot. And the Cornflake Girl music cue, one of the many great music and needle drops in the show. It's just so good. Did you like, you mentioned Amy's house? I love the way or that looks, I guess. Like, how did you kind of think about her up like house, and certainly I guess contrasted with Danny's apartment, but I guess like Amy's house I think has like a great look, and I just like, how'd you kind of guys land on that?
I mean, to be honest, for the locations, it's really Grace Yoon, the production designer, her and Sunny and Jake and Akari really kind of built these really wonderful spaces. And the Amy's house is almost like an art installation, and that it's very bare and classy and expensive and looks cool, but it's very cold in a weird way, even though the color blue isn't present. It's all beige tones, and it's kind of feels like a place where everything's on a pedestal, and that's her issue with her life, is that everything is, has to be a certain way and should be a certain way, and everything is precious. But in the end, she's just kind of unhappy and tired. And then Danny's life is the opposite, is everything from his past, like all these references to him growing up and to his family and things he's done, and it's cluttered and filled. And the fun part about me on this job is like half the time on projects you may not be happy with your location, and you end up lighting it or shooting it in a different way to make the look to embrace the location. But with these locations, I had to do a lot less. For the most part, I just tried to light it naturally. The one thing we did try to kind of mirror in a way was there's like a cave sense that they're both kind of hiding in their houses in a way, and that there's something looming and something dark going on. With Amy's, we kept it all pretty clean and sterile in a way, and that's all window lit, not a lot of mixed temperature lighting. And then Danny's is the opposite. It's fluorescent and warm, and it's messy, just like Danny is. And then there's little bits of color we sprinkled throughout that we also used in production design, but also like in costumes. And it's usually the side characters that actually do have a bit more of a sense of life and aren't kind of slowly dying on the inside. So Paul's room has like these colorful LEDs, and then with Fumi, Amy's mother-in-law, Helen gave her these really beautiful, vibrant costumes just to kind of contrast with everything. And so each little piece of the show that, Sunny and everyone working with him kind of found ways to augment and enhance the concepts that were running throughout the show.
Yeah, I love
But
that.
also, we weren't trying to really go over the top with it. It's one of those things you'd pick up if you watched it a second time, but hopefully you don't see it the first time. You just
Right.
feel it.
Right, that kind of like osmosis, right, or whatever it is. Like you're just like kind of implicitly understanding it without necessarily understanding why you're thinking this, right, or whatever as a viewer. Do you have like how did you structure or think about shooting like the title? I mean, like the beef obviously starts with like a road rage incident, and it's this big. There are big action scenes in the show, but like that is like the first kind of moment. I don't even know if you call it an action scene, but obviously that is like a great chase and stuff. I guess how did you kind of think about that? And I also love like even from like Amy flipping him off like out the window from that forward. I just think the whole scene is like that's a great. I guess like how did you kind of like go about doing that?
I worked with Akari on that episode, and we storyboarded the whole thing. Um, Visited a lot of locations. A lot of time was spent. We had to make our own street for most of the chase. So we found like an industrial district near our studios that were kind of near Simi Valley, and we basically had to bring in a stoplight, and Grace brought in a couple other designs to make it feel like a real street. And then the big concept behind it was trying not to make it feel like the Bourne Identity or um like a big car, like Bullet. And we tried to remove the sexiness of it, if you will. And really, initially, we had wanted to stay entirely in the car with Danny, like literally just we're on him, then we're on his POV, then we're on him to really make it feel authentic. But we also realized that we lost some of you don't understand how dangerous he's driving if you do that, if you don't actually see him swerving around cars and dodging through intersections. So we opted to keep the camera as close as we could to his car, as though we're kind of chasing him and seeing what he's going to do. And we kind of opted to stay away from wide shots or any type of cool shots or drone shots. We really wanted it to feel like this is a very terrible idea, and why is he doing this? And please tell me he's going to stop. And we also wanted to make sure we never knew who was in the white car, which is always funny to make in television. Because like if anyone watches a trailer to this, you're going to know that Amy, played by Ali Wong, is going to be in that white car. But for his character, we had to make sure that he couldn't understand who would drive that car or who was driving that car. Yeah, and it was all very much done simply. We had a rig that allowed Steven to actually be in the car while we were swerving. It's like a motorized platform with a real driver on the back, which is different than a lot of past Hollywood rigs, and that you would be towing it behind a car. This one could actually maneuver. So when you see Steven swinging and moving with inertia, he is actually dodging traffic, and his reactions half the time are real, because we did have cars like kind of charging towards him. And that was all the other fun part was, the actors really got to be in the mix for it. But yeah, I mean, the big challenge of that was finding locations, because we had to find that street and then like a side road, and then we had to find a yard on a corner that we could plant a garden and then destroy. We spent a long time scouting for these houses, but that's just because I think the big trick to the show is that you have to believe that first scene. You have to believe that someone would actually do that, and that the character was maybe justified or maybe not justified. But if you buy into that, which then triggers obviously the whole show, then the show is going to work. But if it was like done cheaply or poorly made or just felt fake or felt like a different movie, then I don't think anyone would want to watch it.
No, it is hearing you talk about it is great, because it's great movie magic. Like I totally bought the whole thing watching it, and like here or TV magic, I guess, in this case. But it does feel like the kind of thing where you're like, oh, this is real, and it is interesting hearing that they're the way you're the rig able to have him in the car, because I was like, oh, it really does seem like he's driving. And like a pet peeve of mine recently has been just like how poor a lot of the visual effects and people in cars look. So I was like, this is a good one. It really looks authentic,
Yeah.
like he's in it. So that's very cool. You mentioned like earlier the scene of him singing Incubus, which I absolutely love, and I love that shot. I guess like how did you guys do that more than once, or like how did you kind of like get that, and like kind of the emotion in that scene is so great
No.
too, and obviously and everything. I just love it. Yeah.
Well, I think originally when we always like kind of like the end of every episode, we wanted it to end on a oneer. So I think originally, it's a slow push it on Steven. And I had wanted to just be that slow push in the whole time, because I think him singing Incubus is beautiful and also very absurd. And then in the edit, it becomes this montage of all the different characters and their different predicaments. put to that song. You know, Amy and Paul, I think, have kissed for the first time, and it's kind of surreal, and Paul's into it. And then pushing it on Steven also has this one. There's this like everything in the show to me always feels like it's coming from like the bones of what people grew up in the 90s with. And so like that ending with music playing and these dramatic things is very Dawson's Creek. And I kind of love that. And actually later in the show, there is a callback to Dawson's Creek with some of the music they choose. But it's like these little moments that are very sincere for a show where people are generally not being good people. I don't know. It was a nice, dichotomy for the rest of the show.
Did you have like it is like I think maybe like I'm like it definitely I feel like I'm in the right age for it. I mean, you might be also just based on like look, I don't know, but I'm like I feel like it's like growing like like loving the 90s stuff and like early 2000s, and that's what I think this show is great for, like, like elder millennials or like younger Gen X or whatever that age group is. I guess did you look at stuff like from that era for this at all, or like did you think of like did you have like do you do that even as a cinematographer in this, or are you kind of like do you try to stay away from like looking at stuff for inspirations or whatever, I guess?
For this show, I mean, it's always fun to talk references. Sonny really liked like all kids from the 90s. He loves, Magnolia and Punch Drunk Love. But those weren't fully the references we went for. Like the show's not anamorphic and we didn't light as dramatically as those shows did. But what we did take from that is we felt that there is an intent in this severity, an intenseness to how the shows were photographed, and we wanted to find a look that was as kind of punchy, PTA style from back then. I'd call punchy naturalism, in that it's definitely feels real and present, but it's also heightened. And so for what we did is we built a couple of LUTs with our colorist Alex Bickle, and then we just shot all the different sets with stand-ins, and then we brought them in and we looked at them with Sunny, and we landed on one that made California's sun feel hot and spicy and kind of severe, because it doesn't feel the same way, obviously, to me anywhere else. Like if you go to the East Coast, it's damper and softer and fuzzier, and out here it's kind of piercing and shocking. And so we landed on the LUT that created that. And then in the grade, actually when we were grading, there's a scene where Danny and Paul are working out, and they're just in tank tops in hard sun. And we watched the original beach volleyball scene from Top Gun, like from the 80s. And that became a big muse. We just loved how that looked. And then somehow that found its way into the look of the show, which has nothing to do with the show. It's just we love this, like something as stylized and dramatic as that scene. And then we kind of found the look for the sun, and the contrast kind of came out of that.
Yeah.
Which we wanted to, because the rest of the show, again, is kind of subtle. We're not swinging for the fences with a lot of the design concepts. We're trying to make people believe that this is possible. And so having a LUT or a look to the show being a little more dramatic was fun to kind of, beef it up.
Right. You've done a lot, obviously. You're like an incredible cinematographer. You've done like a lot of great films, including Everything Everywhere, obviously. And then like this, a lot of TV as well. Like, do you view them differently, or do you kind of just approach it as the same kind of storytelling thing? Or do you view TV are there different things you have to do with TV, you think, than compared to film? I'm only asking because like I feel like Beef is like it's TV, but it does have like it just feels like elevated TV, for lack of better terms. I don't know. Do you like approach these things differently at all, or no?
Yeah, I mean the different. I've done some other television, and you do sometimes you just spray it down. You have multiple cameras. You're just trying to get the performances, which is just fine. But you can tell there's not a design behind the edit or the shot structure of the show. And on Beef, that was like the big thing, because it's a really fun script, and the shot structure is what's going to let the audience know like that something's around the corner, that a character's plotting something. More importantly, it's going to let the audience feel good or bad, as opposed to just witnessing something. You feel like you're kind of a part of it. You're not being pulled along. You feel like you're in cahoots by the way we shot it. But yeah, television is different than films, I mean, from the very basic things, where whenever we shoot a phone insert for TV now, I'm like, just punch all the way in. I don't care about seeing the phone. I just want to make sure wherever the person is in the room watching the show, that they can read the tiny text. Because if they're on their couch or in the kitchen looking at the screen or whatever, they're going to miss that beat, and the rest of the episode's ruined. On a movie, it'd be like polar opposite. It's like, 50-foot screen. You don't have to, you can show the whole phone. That's like the most basic of it. But yeah, no, you have to be a little more. You can't. Unfortunately, I feel like it's hard to be subtle on television because I feel like people miss things, and slash they're distracted because they're on their phone or other things are going on in their house. So planning oneers or trying to do something very like layered and textured is always tricky. You always have to have something a bit louder and a bit more present. I find in filmmaking for television that kind of helps the audience tag along or potentially catch up. You can't, you can't have someone do something far in the background. You have to be a little more, you have to be more blunt with your intentions, I think.
Yeah, I will say though, I think in this show you've managed maybe split the difference really well, and like the way I think there is like a lot of like it does. I understand exactly what you're saying because like I've seen shows even recently where I'm just like I'm not if it's not like especially on the phone thing. I'm not looking if I missed it, it's just too small or whatever. But anyway, it's great. I love this show so much. I love your work on it, Larkin Seiple. We have to wrap up here, but Emmy Award nominated cinematographer whose new project is Beef. Thank you so much, Larkin.
Thank you so much for having me.